All right, hello people, Linker here today, the wanted podcast, How to Build Your Tree Updated Guide by a very special guest. Please say hello.
Hey people, maybe you remember my voice, maybe you don't.
And this is Grub. We've made a couple videos in the past, and today we're talking about the wonderful Elder Tree guide that he's built. I think the most up-to-date one, I think probably the most descriptive one I've ever seen. Runs through a lot. But first, what made you do this?
Well, I get a lot of questions of people asking me, well, what should I do with my tree? What should I do? What should I do? So I wanted to cover sort of my general method of when I would look at someone's tree, of what I would be looking for, what my general thought process would be, how I see each branch, each ability within the branch, the key heroes, and just basically try and allow people to come through a similar sort of process, not necessarily the same exact process that I would use, but just to give them a more precise way of viewing the tree, which I think is often less understood than perhaps it could be. It's 47 on the sustenance, not 42. It's supposed to be 47, but I have like 200, 250 images of this guide on my computer, so I ordered the wrong one.
No, all good, all good. Definitely good to have it clarified here. But why don't you talk about some of the more obvious stuff? So, for example, some of the benchmarks. There's obviously like, why aren't you using the zeros? Like, what's good about the twos and the sevens for people that are more starting? And then for the more advanced, like, what's the 9 benchmark about? Bringing everybody up to speed.
Well, primarily the optimal build path is based on the percentage stats because unless you're competing in the LC level, the percentage stats above like I think it's about level 330 or so is infinitely higher value than just raw base stats to the point that we haven't included that actually in the main guide. So the logic is that these always occur on either a 2 or a 7 outside of the first couple levels where it occurs on 9 and 7, and 9 obviously being a very quick point where you can reach for the additional bonus to ensure that you get a very high amount of value very, very quickly. So
This
these are intended mostly as a sort of rough path that you would follow where you would expect the stats to really start to matter when your abilities are getting a bit stronger and how things start to progress.
Yeah, so this is completely ignoring like the old approach that both me and you had. Like the last guide I made personally was based on Grub's last guide, which at the time was talking more about abilities and everything. But as we progressed to like more endgame meta, like higher and higher deficits, just stats become so crucial, like you say. So this is just the brief summary of it. And in this guide, if I understand correctly, ranked each one of the three in different modes like PvE, PvP. And you also talked about the specific barricade manipulation. This is something I personally never thought about. And I think it's really, really awesome. I think this is something like completely new that we didn't talk about enough before. And we're just kind of mentioned. So why won't you just go ahead and talk about that?
Well, the idea behind the tree is that ultimately a lot of people see it as a sort of like general account building tool. You use it to get your entire account stronger, but it's actually more effectively utilized as a carry steroid. Basically, the
Hmm.
idea behind the guide is to focus on the 2 carry trees at the moment, which are celerity and sorcery. Try and get those heroes to the highest power, so that when you pair them with a fortitude hero like your Brutus, like your Grizzle, to ensure that they stay alive and get the opportunity to output either the damage or control depending on the hero that it is. And I expect to see Barricade be even more relevant going forward, just because it's so easy to use the tree to manipulate it, and then you can just reset it for another team. So this is a very, very, very powerful tool you can use to really push at the cutting edge, cutting edge rather.
Definitely, definitely. So the idea is that obviously Barricade procs on the highest attack power character that you have, and something that people came up to me and was surprised about is why can't I get my Rosaline in the past to follow someone? Now you can get her to follow anything, but still you want Barricade to proc on these carries. So the biggest power that you have, the biggest control the player has, is the percentage stats. Where do you think like the line passes where like base dice are almost completely irrelevant? Where does that happen?
Well, it depends on the player. If it's someone who really wants to compete at the LC level, then they're going to be very, very relevant. But it comes to a point where even if you have a tree at 123, I believe is the max branch with the new hero that just came out, then even the very highest level, you're not going to notice the base stats. So it really does come pretty early, probably between 240 and 330, depending on the branch and the hero.
I see. Okay. Yeah, yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's really incredible. I'll leave the guide obviously in the description for everybody to be able to just read deeply how you analyze these, because there's a lot of things that I think break the consensus. For example, sustenance, which traditionally like we put on par with celerity. Here's like significantly lower ranked. It's almost like in the lower bracket where you put it with Fortitude and Might, which was really interesting. Alongside, obviously, like the divide that you put between PvP oriented modes like LC, where you have martial arts, and AE modes, and these kinds of modes where you really need those base stats for certain heroes, and just overall PvE progression, which I think is the main priority of most players going forward.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of nuances as well behind the different tree branches for the most part. The only exception to the rule is celerity, which is just a ridiculous tree in nearly every bit of content. All the abilities are amazing. It's got a ridiculously wide and deep hero pool. It is easily the best branch by a considerable margin at the moment.
Yeah, it's both like the branch abilities, the stats that it gives, dodge being valuable, but like the haste on the 3 is just insane. And then on top of that, just the amount of heroes that benefit from it, because obviously if you have like a smaller pool of heroes, and nowadays you're able to kind of prioritize as you grab your teams towards those endgame chapters, like the flexibility that you get in the Aaron sets, you get Lucretia, you get Raku, you get Kren, you get all these heroes you put down here, and many others that are just really, really good. I think it's just good in every single front. Possibly, I would even bump down like all the other ones just 1 point, just to like show how strong it is.
But yeah, it's just so easily head and shoulders the best tree for so many reasons. And as Link has already said, the abilities are absolutely fantastic. You'll notice the breakpoints are a little different on celerity as well. It's because after 65 is where you get the additional haste increase, and then that becomes an incredibly powerful point, to the point that you get almost as big a bonus from that as you do from a maxed out sustenance tree. So you're getting more sustenance than you would from an entire tree off one ability.
That's just so good. It just was always good, but this showcase I think really demonstrates why that is. Also, you went over all the different tree abilities. The only mention I think I had for you is how Fortitude is a little tricky because it both has haste and the reduction of haste with the Slum and Thorn, which is something that you said that you personally don't use Thorn yourself. Would you look at me? I used to have my own kind of values and stuff. But is there anything else that you feel like in retrospect you kind of want to talk about in terms of synergies or maybe other modes like Twisted Realm and how it impacts the different priorities here?
I expect that I will get a lot of people telling me that Fortitude is stronger than I have given it credit for in this. The problem isn't the abilities or the Fortitude tree itself, it's the heroes. The heroes generally don't make very good use of the additional stats. Like a lot of the heroes you're going to use, like Thorin, you actually need him to take more damage. So going too high in the Fortitude tree with the haste reduction actually decreases the amount of damage that he will be dealing as a result. A lot of the heroes, like Rizal, is paired with armor all the time, so the defensive
Yeah,
stats.
and like Brutus doesn't care about health and haste. He's there to be an immune beast, right? So, like a lot of these, I feel don't enjoy the stat bonuses as much. What do you think about Might in other modes like TR, like AE?
Yeah, Might has been dropped noticeably from where people would probably expect it to see, because generally it looks like Lilith aren't pushing the Fabled realm quite as hard as people initially suspected. Because when the first guy came out, I knew that Fable would be introduced into the game. So the idea was to sort of preempt that whole. I assumed Lilith would push it really, really strongly and really force people to go up through the levels, but they haven't really pushed it that hard. So currently, a lot of people are making it into Fabled now, and Might previously was the sort of the branch you want to invest into if you really want to get your TR rewards up. But now it's at the point where it just doesn't matter. And the problem is with AE is most people probably know this by now, but the strongest strategy at the moment for like the extreme whale guilds, like people with like max out accounts of every hero 5-star plus 40s and all this, they start Might because it hits its power curve in AE a lot earlier. And then they use it basically to do most of the damage to the boss, and then they transition out of it. But for most players, you're going to get very little value out of Might because they have no inherent defense that will allow them to go through that deficit.
Exactly. I think Might has the issue that Fortitude has that you mentioned earlier, where some of the heroes just don't use the stats as well. So obviously, like Isold and Soros, they like Life Leech, but there's no haste on there. But then again, stuff like, I don't know, Estrilda, Alna, Zorath, like heroes that can be used to varying degrees of success, but some of them like Estrilda Life Leech, right? Like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean, Life Leech is something that you need. You need attack speed and damage. A lot of people don't understand the mechanics behind it, but you need both. There's no good at just hitting really hard very rarely. You need to be able to hit hard consistently in order to really benefit from the Life Leech amount. So there is sort of this disconnect between the stats that it provides and the bonuses that it gives. And the other problem, of course, is that defensive scaling on the player side is not particularly strong because the enemies just get exponentially stronger and stronger to the point that certain methods of increasing your tankiness just don't do anything. And they're massively borne out by invulnerability, like Brutus, like Ulna.
For sure. Shout out to my video on HP versus defense.
I'm gonna shout that out, but now.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. But like, also another thing that I feel like stands in contrast from like what we've viewed in the past is how high sorcery is compared to other tree branches. And I think this is something that we see like with all these sorcery carries that are rising. I think Odin being the like key hero here, but so many others also rising to the front.
Yeah, I mean, sorcery, we've started to see, I mean, control's always been relevant, right? But a lot of the mage heroes are the heroes that provide the premier sort of control, like Khazar's SI-30 is one of the very strongest SIs in the game. The fact that with Mahira and the rise of Rosalind, you can really just use her ultimate to just chain control enemies. So sorcery is becoming ever stronger, and with the more recent mage artifacts like Warden coming out, then you've got actual real ability to deal damage, and you see heroes like Odin that just bring an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage and control. Like Odin really is an absolutely ridiculous hero. If you don't have him 39 of 9, you need to build him. He's absolutely ridiculous. I'll call him out in
Yeah.
particular.
I think me and Grub had a back and forth where we, at first, like way back, didn't like Odin, he liked Odin, then I liked Odin, then he didn't like Odin. I think it was kind of a back and forth, but with the recent buff, and this is something that we both agree on, so you have to know it's correct, because me and Grub disagree about everything there is to disagree about. Odin's just been completely
I mean,
ridiculous.
to the point where as well, I've kept him on my furniture wish list past 9 of 9 to go for the haste duplicates on his small. Is it small furniture or his hanging furniture? I think it's small
Okay.
furniture with Odin because extra haste on him is just exponentially more powerful. When it gets to the point where he's already taken over the fight with like the first 10 seconds, he's
All right,
just
that's
ridiculous.
maybe a bit more than I give, but still, nah, it's absolutely incredible. Why won't you go just over just the priorities, just for everybody? Just there's one place, because I think nobody's gonna release another guide like this in a while, this descriptive for sure. So why don't you just go over it and just explain once and for all everything that's here, like in the summary section? What do we pick first, and how do I go about building my tree if I'm a starting player and I want to do really good in the end game?
The general logic, as I've said, is just sort of this duo carry setup where you want to go into celerity and sorcery. You want to ensure that you have a solid enough front line from your might, your fortitude, and your sustenance. But generally speaking, their role is almost always to just survive and get one ability off, maybe two abilities, depending on the hero. But you really should be focusing more on the carry hero. So you're going right for those higher ROI curves right at the beginning where you're getting the massive stat boosts at 9 where the percentage stats will really start to come in, and then you're focusing on your celerity first for everybody. Like everybody goes celerity first. And sorcery is designed to come a little bit later because a lot of the heroes on it are a little bit more expensive to build, like Khazard, Daph, Mahira, all these heroes that really almost require SI-30 that really, really need that investment. So I've deliberately
Mm-hmm.
put sorcery a little bit later in the list to ensure that people should be hitting the point around the same time they're going to start to get those heroes online. And then there's a little bit of focus on might on there, and eventually fortitude, just to make sure those areas don't fall too far behind. But generally, by that point, you'll have your account mostly fleshed out. But the overall priority really is just celerity all the way. That just needs to be maxed for everybody. And then sorcery might actually is actually higher than sustenance in the overall priority, just because it starts to get to the point where only the haste from sus really matters that much. Because a lot of these heroes have got invulnerability built with anyway, so the defensive stats are less relevant than they used to be.
I see. Just want to touch like on a quick point because this really brings the contrast between the trees. Like here you have like celerity to 42 essentially before some of these get to 10. And one issue that some players will see, always like the tree is strong. It justifies this level of investment at some point. But like one issue that players will face, obviously, like they have the max level on the tree. So let's say I'm a player, like you know this, I'm a player in chapter 34. I'm doing decent. I got my trees up, but I'm like I want to get my celerity to 65, but my cap is like at 63. Then what do I do in the meantime?
You want to stop at the nearest percentage breakpoint. So as Link has just said, if it's 65, then you want to stop at the closer ones. So you're literally looking for the closest stat point and then just stopping it there. Unless there are some exceptions, but it's mostly the celerity abilities where you'll see it's every 15 levels. But generally speaking, you want to go to the closest percentage stat bonus that you get at that level, which is at the 2s and the 7s, as you know.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. So I stop on the 2 and the 7, and then what do I do in the meantime? Do I just hold off that? Like, how much do I need to have for me to kind of like move around and maybe change my priorities a bit?
Well, it would depend on whether you want to go for what the next breakpoint is and how quickly you think you can get those heroes up. It's more sort of an individual decision. It's difficult for me to say absolutely what people should be doing, because if you're going to get those, you're going to be able to go up those extra 3, 4, 5 base levels within a couple of days. Then of course you should wait and hold the dust until then. But if it's something that may take a little longer, then you can momentarily skip to go to the next point and then just come back to it when you are able to. But it's mostly an individual decision. So just make sure you know how roughly how long it will take you to ascend these heroes versus your dust income. You don't want to come to the point where you've got 8,000 just sitting around. You really want to make sure that you are spending every point and getting the maximum value out of this, because this mechanic is really, really ridiculous when you invest into it properly.
I see. So this is less of like one level here, two levels there. This is more of like a general guide so that I don't make the big mistakes in the end game. Like there's some room for flexibility depending on context. Sometimes I might have like a super strong major count where I can do, and sometimes I might be stuck on like a dust level and then I can kind of move around. There's some wiggle room. So I need to know my fundamentals. But the role with this, if I get you correctly, let me know if I'm wrong on this, is just like a beacon for you to look forward to the end game. This is what I want to have. This is how I want to get there, and like the line between there, you can draw yourself.
Yeah, this is mostly intended to. A beacon is a nice metaphor for it. It's intended to be a a closely optimal path. It's not the absolute optimal, but it is about as close as you can realistically get. When I can advise people on a much wider scale. Of course, you can go into minutia and you can really discuss it with an individual, but generally speaking, this is what most people should be doing. You will get, of course, get outliers, but this is the rough sort of line you should be following.
Yeah, and I also definitely want to shout out the guide. Definitely check out the description. Obviously, I uploaded this just now. I'll also get you a reward for later. But Grub also did a comprehensive analysis on each of the abilities, so you're able to take these decisions in context and you're able to understand them. We just went over this just so that you know the resource and the basics, and there's a lot to take into account here. Like players that like LC and TR need to really understand their priorities straight. Obviously, there's some room for flexibility, some of the Thorn stuff that we talked about. But yeah, I really like this overall. I think it's definitely one of the most descriptive guides that we've had. And this kind of content is amazing. So, Grub, when are we having you be a community supporter? When is that happening?
To be honest, I doubt it's something that the mods really look at very often. I wouldn't be surprised if they just don't really focus too much on flares, because not really majorly important for most people, is it? It's something that'd be nice to have, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that's like really, really super important.
Yeah, it's more about helping people.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if someone said I could either have a flare that makes little difference to my overall account, or I could help people with guides in every now and then I'd definitely take the helping.
Okay. All right. Yo, Grub. Absolutely awesome to talk to you.
Also, shout out to Hyper like that at the end if he sees
All right. He tried to make this happen for like such a long time.
it.
At any level, even a podcast about trees and everything. And I've been Linker. Peace.